What is up, my fellow gamers? Today we're gonna have a video on 11 tips and tricks that some people might not know about. Sometimes maybe it's going to be a clarification to a particular mechanic. These are all things that I wish I knew previously, and since everybody's making a video like that, I thought I'm gonna throw my 2 cents in, and this is going to be my very first tip. Initially, I didn't really know how to use my mount. I constantly kept thinking that the speed keeps changing and I don't know how to control it, and sometimes I spam the space bar and it goes quick or it goes slow, and I didn't know. And it's really quite simple. Depending on where you move your cursor away, due to the controller design for our beautiful game Diablo 4, your mount will move faster or slower. So sometimes if you move your cursor close by, even if you spam your space bars, it's not actually gonna go faster. And I've seen a lot of frustration from a lot of people about this, but that's just the console design, and if you want to fix it, just move your cursor away. And by the way, the further you move away, the more useful it is. So if you have a small monitor, and if you're playing a small resolution, you might want to crank it up. You utilize the widescreen, because sometimes when you're running down, you're actually unable to maximize your mount speed because your resolution is too small. So keep that in mind. Widescreen does help out, although there is just a radius that to the sides, it's large enough. Bottom and top, not always. Another common misconceptions that I've seen being spread around all the time is ignore every side quest. Never do anything other than the main quest when you are a beginner player. And that is in fact actually not true. Side quests and renown are very, very valuable. And if you stick to just going through your main story, the campaign, you will fall behind on levels and you will not be able to progress your character, which becomes pretty dangerous, especially if you're on hardcore. I remember listening to this initially, and by the time I ended up getting to, spoiler, Lilith, I was running the dungeon like 12 levels under or above my character level, which, as you can imagine, posed a lot of trouble. So make sure that early on you are taking care of some things, especially your statues. So the side quests in particular don't give you a whole lot of XP, but even having strongholds done will greatly benefit your play, because the renown is very valuable. The extra skill point, the potion capacity, +1 skill point, it only takes 1200 renown, and it will greatly enhance your enjoyment of the game. The statues might make that difference too, but generally they don't really give a whole lot of XP, so you might want to be focusing on strongholds. Some side quests if you find some good ones, but that I think is going to require a lot more expertise. And then just getting waypoints and exploring certain areas. You can see that my renown is not that high in some areas and really high in others, and you can see that my map is not fully unlocked, but I do have access to all of the renown rewards. And the reason for that is, even though your renown is not shared across characters, the renown rewards are in fact so, which poses a pretty tricky situation. I do have an entire video about it, so if you are interested in it, make sure to check that video out. But it just essentially means that maybe if you're planning on playing multiple characters, you might want to be focusing on renown in one particular area and neglect another one, while on the next character you focus on the new area entirely. The biggest tip that I can give to any hardcore player, or any player in particular in Diablo 4 for sure, is going to be make sure to keybind your consumables and certain other abilities, your elixirs, maybe exiting the dungeon. And a lot of people don't know that you can actually do that. Most people use this wheel, and you know, you're gonna use it to maybe use your taunt or something. Well, that you can do that if you want to, but if you click this customize button, you can add whatever you want, and part of it is leave dungeon, which again, most people use the wheel for that, and your consumables. And as you can see, there are not assigned icons, and all you have to do is drag it onto any spot, anywhere. This elixir of cruelty is going to go into my middle slot. I'm going to save that, and now if I click the button, it's going to be available here. But what if I need to use it quickly and click hello instead? Well, you can go into the options, and if you go to the controls and scroll pretty far down, you've got different settings for these buttons. In my case, in particular, I tend to bind elixirs. There is an elixir that makes you unstoppable, as an example. But most importantly, and the thing that I would recommend to every hardcore player, it's going to be Scroll of Escape. So I've got my Scroll of Escape bound to my F3 key, which is also my Path of Exile logout macro. And whenever I'm in danger, whenever anything's happening and I am not stunned, because this is a common misconception that you can just use your Scroll of Escape anytime. No, you actually, if you are CC'd, if you are crowd controlled, you cannot use it, or crowd controlled that prevents your any action from your character. So if you're slowed, of course you can use it. All I gotta do is click F3 and bam, just like that, I'm out of there, bro. Make sure to utilize this as many ways as possible. I've seen people die in this way. You know, you definitely don't want to end up in that situation. The next tip that we're going to be talking about is how you shouldn't AFK in dungeons. I have unfortunately died like that on my hardcore character, and the reason for it is because Diablo 4 used to have a really big problem with backtracking in certain dungeons, and Blizzard's fix was to make it so that for those dungeons in which you have to kill every single mob, those mobs will actually actively seek you out regardless of where you are in the instance. But what they failed to mention is that this actually works in any dungeon whatsoever. Another common misconception is that you actually have iFrames, invulnerability frames, on your dodge. That is not in fact the case. You can dodge certain types of crowd control, but if you are attempting to dodge attacks and some more deadly crowd controls, make sure to position yourself with your spacebar rather than actually use it to become invulnerable like certain other games. This next one is a big one if you are progressing through the different difficulties, and that is that depending on your level, your vendors will have different rewards. And when I'm talking about vendors, I am talking about this one in particular, the Obol vendor. So sometimes you're going to notice how you might have sacred items available and ancestral items available. And while it is possible to get an ancestral item from an item that would otherwise show you that it is only sacred, there are certain breakpoints for these things. So if you are in difficulty tier 3, you would think that you would be able to get sacred items from your vendor, but this is restricted by level. So you're only going to be able to get those items at level 53. For ancestral items, it's going to be 73. And the way that you reset your vendors is by running a dungeon or just waiting a certain amount of time, and your vendors should be changing. But what is most important about all of these things is that depending on when you want to use your obols, because certain rewards are only available in certain tiers, you should be saving your obol caches, because your obol maximum can only go so high, and sometimes you're not going to want to use your obols in the early stages of the game because maybe you want to keep them for tier 3 so you can upgrade your character immediately with that new fresh gear. And for that reason, make sure to not use your obol caches immediately. There will be a big display on it. They've typically come from some events, but mostly side quests. So you might want to be preserving those. You can put them in your stash and use them whenever, just so you don't max out your obols at an unfortunate time. Another big point of confusion for players is going to be the close stat and the distant stat. So especially if you're coming over from Path of Exile, we have a stat called Nearby, and that gets really confusing. It's very different depending on the sort of ability that you're going to be using. But in this game, it's actually pretty set. And it's not exactly this, but just about. If you go to Key of Ashad, the size of the waypoint is pretty much exactly the close by distance. So if I run all the way to this brick, it's about right here where this brick is, all the way from the center, and anything that is distant is just larger than that. So if you're ever confused by how far that is, there's your answer. I think a big tip that I really could have used in my hardcore adventures, especially on the beta, was that the more you see of a world boss, or any boss in particular, the better. I think this is going to be my biggest advice for world bosses, but this applies anywhere. Make sure to face tank as much as possible. I think the biggest mistake that I'm seeing players commit to is trying to off screen, really get it far away from the boss, and you're not able to do what the boss is doing. And really much of the game, especially you're going to notice with world bosses, is built around the fact that, you know, they don't really want melee players to get all that destroyed. If you are a distant player, try and sit really next to a Shava, and you're going to notice that other than her auto attack, she pretty much does nothing. A big issue for players is distinguishing whenever they need to salvage items or they need to sell them to the vendor. And my biggest advice for that is, early on, you're not going to need a whole lot of gold, but you will need a lot of materials. And for that reason, in the earlier stages of the game, you should be salvaging. And then in the latter stages of the game, when you get to tier 3 or tier 4, you're going to be vendoring items because they're generally much more expensive. You're able to sell them for a lot of gold, but the cost of the resources and the materials remains the same. Obviously, keep an eye out on whatever materials you're going to need at the time. But if you're progressing from the early stages, this is really something that I think I could have saved myself a lot of time with, especially when it comes to materials that you can gather around the world. This would have made a big difference for me. So your crushed bones, and most importantly, silver ore that is used for upgrading your weapon. So whenever you're seeing any sort of herb or anything like that, or any ore, really try and get to it as fast as possible. Pick up those resources because they're going to be very valuable in the future. Also remember that you can always go to the Alchemist, go to the Refine Resources section, and whenever there's one particular mat that you are in desperate need of, such as that pesky silver ore we've mentioned previously, you can always refine those and make it into whatever you want. But not every material is going to be available here, so that's something to watch out for. The final and the biggest tip that I can give anybody is going to be the one in regards to aspects. There was so much misconception about this early on and so much confusion. I've been misled severely, and I hope that this is not going to be the case for you. You can use any aspect on any piece of gear, regardless of whether it's normal, sacred, ancestral, however you want to do that. You can mix and match these however you want. So if you get a fantastic aspect early on, maybe this incredible deal 17% increased damage while you have a barrier active is something that you want to save yourself and apply it to ancestral gear, you can absolutely do that. There is nothing that prevents you from doing so. All you have to do is put it into this here, and you can see that because it's applicable to a weapon, you're going to be able to do so. One thing that I've noticed that people are struggling with a lot is the fact that not every type of aspect goes on every piece of gear. So if you are running into a problem where this doesn't work for you, it's not because you can't mix and match these. It is in fact because, as you can see below this aspect right here, the allowed item types are going to be one-handed weapon, two-handed weapon, gloves, amulet, and ring. So something to watch out for. I know a lot of people ran into the problem where they were trying to put an aspect that doesn't match on another weapon, and they thought that the reason for that was the difference in where that came from, what tier of content that came from. That is not the fact. You can do this however you want. And with that, we're going to conclude this video. Hope these tips were useful for at least some of you guys. Probably not everything landed, but you know, you gotta go for those YouTube views. So let me know if you guys want to hear about anything else in the future. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and good luck, gamers.